This story is presented by Creepy Mystery, from the author, Doughty's audiobooks. Welcome, brave souls, to the world of the dead. No, not ghosts and ghouls, though those are fun too. But the real, fascinating world of what happens when we die. Kids ask the best questions, and today I have some answers. Let's start with the most important one. Will your cat eat your eyeballs when you die? Well, the short answer is maybe. But let's not rush to conclusions. First, let's explore the science of death, the myths of burial, and some truly bizarre historical funeral practices. Chapter 1: Will my cat really eat me? A cozy beginning? Or the beginning of the end? It starts like any other night. You're lounging on the couch, scrolling through your phone, with your beloved cat, Mr. Whiskers, curled up beside you. He's purring softly, his tiny pink nose twitching as he drifts in and out of sleep. You scratch behind his ears, and he stretches, flashing his razor-sharp little teeth. You've always thought of Mr. Whiskers as your furry best friend. A gentle companion who greets you when you come home, stares at you judgmentally when you eat chips, and occasionally knocks things off tables just to remind you who's in charge. But then, a dark thought creeps into your mind. If I died right here, right now, would Mr. Whiskers eat me? A ridiculous idea, right? Your cat loves you. He would probably sit by your side, mourning you in dignified silence. Maybe even lie on your chest like he always does, waiting for you to wake up. Or would he? A case of feline betrayal. Science, unfortunately, has some disturbing news for you. Veterinary and forensic studies have shown that, yes, your beloved cat might eat you if you died and weren't found in time. In fact, it's not even an uncommon phenomenon. In 1994, a forensic case in Berlin recorded a woman who had passed away in her apartment, unnoticed for several days. When authorities finally entered, they discovered something chilling. Her pet cats, hungry and left with no other option, had started eating her body, and they hadn't waited long. Forensic evidence suggests that, in many cases, cats begin by nibbling on the softest parts of the face, the lips, the nose, and yes, the eyeballs. Why? Because cats, despite their cute whiskers and tiny toe beans, are still natural-born predators. Unlike dogs, who have been domesticated for thousands of years to be our loyal companions, cats still retain many of their wild instincts. When faced with extreme hunger, a cat won't think about funeral etiquette, it will think about survival. The science of post-mortem snacking. Here's how it happens. Stage 1. The waiting game. At first, your cat will probably check on you. A few nudges, maybe even a meow of concern. If you don't respond, it'll be confused but patient. After all, you might just be ignoring it, which is what humans seem to do sometimes. Stage 2. Hunger sets in. After a day or two, the food bowl is empty. Mr. Whiskers starts to get restless. He's an obligate carnivore, his body needs meat. If no one comes to check on you, he may start to reassess the situation. Stage 3. Instinct takes over. With no other option, your cat will seek out the easiest, most accessible food source. The face is the softest part of the body, with no thick clothing or tough muscle to get through. This is why reports consistently find evidence of postmortem consumption on the lips, nose, and eyes first. It's nothing personal. In the wild, a cat would do the same thing if its companion died. They are survivors, and survival means doing what is necessary, even if that means taking a bite out of their beloved human. But dogs would never do that, right? Now, you might be thinking, but dogs are different. My dog would wait for help. Well, not exactly. Dogs have also been documented eating their deceased owners. However, the difference is how long they wait. Studies show that dogs often wait longer before resorting to this desperate measure, sometimes holding out for a week or more. Cats, on the other hand, are far less sentimental. Some reports suggest that a cat may start within a day or two. So while your dog might lie by your side for as long as it can before hunger overtakes it, your cat? Well, your cat is much quicker to make a meal out of you. History's hungry cats. Throughout history, there have been eerie accounts of cats treating their deceased owners not as mournful companions, but as a convenient food source. Ancient Egypt. The Egyptians worshipped cats and even mummified them alongside their human owners. But did those cats ever get hungry before mummification? Some researchers believe that in cases where owners died alone, their pet cats may have taken a few bites before anyone arrived. Medieval Europe, there were myths that cats could steal souls by sitting on a person's chest and staring into their eyes. While this is not scientifically accurate, it could be a reflection of real cases where cats were found near the missing eyes of the deceased. Victorian era. The Victorians were obsessed with death and mourning rituals, but they also had a deep paranoia about being buried alive. Some people even installed safety coffins with bells, just in case they woke up underground. Why? Perhaps because they had already seen what their cats were capable of. How to prevent post-mortem snacking. Now that you know the truth, you might be wondering, how do I make sure my cat doesn't eat me? Good question. Here are some practical steps. Live forever. Not realistic, but hey, it's an option. Have a backup feeder. Make sure someone always checks in on you, especially if you live alone. Leave extra food. If you're going on a long trip, don't just fill up the bowl. Make sure there's enough food to last your cat in case of an emergency. Train your cat to eat something else. Teach your cat that chicken is more delicious than human flesh. No guarantees on this method, though. Chapter 2. What happens if you die in space? Now, let's leave the living room and blast off into space. What happens if an astronaut dies up there? Do they float forever like a sci-fi ghost? NASA has no official space burial policy, because no astronaut has ever died in space without returning. If a body is left in space, it won't decompose normally. There's no oxygen, so bacteria can't do their job. But if the astronaut's suit is breached, they'd freeze or swell up like a balloon. Theoretically, if no one retrieves the body, it could float through space for millions of years. So technically, you could become a real-life space ghost. Chapter 3. Why do dead people look fake? The uncanny valley of death. If you've ever attended an open casket funeral, you may have noticed something unsettling. The person lying there, whether it's a beloved grandparent, a distant relative, or a friend, doesn't quite look like themselves. Maybe their face is too smooth, their expression too neutral, or their skin color slightly off. No matter how well the mortician has prepared them, they never quite look real. Why does this happen? It's not just a trick of the mind, it's a combination of biology, chemistry, and psychology. And once you understand the reasons, you might never look at a body the same way again. Life versus death. The missing spark. The main reason dead people look off is simple. They're not alive anymore. That may sound obvious, but the difference is more than just the absence of movement or breath. It's the lack of subtle, unconscious signals that make a person feel alive. Micro-expressions are gone. When someone is alive, their face is constantly shifting. Tiny movements in the eyebrows, lips, and eyelids happen without them even noticing. Even when someone is asleep, their facial muscles remain slightly active. The skin stops reacting. When we're alive, our skin is full of circulating blood, giving it warmth, elasticity, and slight changes in color depending on emotions or temperature. Once the heart stops beating, the skin loses its natural glow, and embalming chemicals can only do so much to bring it back. The eyes are too still. Eyes are often called the window to the soul because they are incredibly expressive. In life, they're always darting around, adjusting to light, dilating, blinking. In death, they don't do any of that, which is why many morticians keep them closed or use special techniques to keep them looking natural. Without these signs of life, our brains instinctively recognize that something is wrong. We've evolved to detect life in others, and when we don't see those subtle details, the person looks eerily unreal. The science of a changing face. After death, the body goes through some pretty dramatic changes. The reason people don't look like themselves anymore is because the biological structures that held everything in place are breaking down. What happens to the face after death? Loss of muscle tension, primary flaccidity. Within minutes to hours after death, all the muscles in the body relax. This means the face loses the tension that once gave it unique expressions. The jaw slackens, the cheeks droop, and the lips part slightly unless they're closed manually. Rigor mortis sets in. After a few hours, the body enters rigor mortis, causing the muscles to stiffen. This is why morticians have to manipulate the limbs and face before it sets in. Otherwise, the body might freeze in an unnatural position. Skin color changes. The rosy, pinkish tones of the skin are gone because the blood is no longer circulating. Instead, the skin begins to turn pale, gray, or even a slight bluish tint. Morticians apply makeup to restore a natural appearance, but it never looks quite the same. Dehydration and shrinking features. As moisture leaves the body, the skin tightens and sinks, which can make the nose look more prominent, the lips thinner, and the eyes slightly sunken. Morticians sometimes use cotton, wax, or filler to plump up these areas and restore a more natural shape. The plaster effect of embalming. Embalming preserves the body, but it also changes the texture of the skin. The chemicals remove all the softness and elasticity, making the skin feel more like wax or plastic. This is one of the biggest reasons why dead bodies don't look quite like the living person they once were. The art of making dead people look alive. Morticians do everything they can to restore a person's familiar appearance. In fact, restorative art is an entire field of study in mortuary science. Some of the tricks used include wiring the jaw shut so the mouth doesn't fall open, gluing or suturing the eyes closed so they don't appear hollow, injecting color into the skin to bring back a more natural tone, using wax to reshape features like the nose, lips, or even hands, applying heavy makeup to simulate the warmth of life. But no matter how skilled a mortician is, there's always something off, because ultimately they're not restoring life, they're creating an illusion of it. The uncanny valley of corpses. Ever heard of the uncanny valley? It's the phenomenon where something looks almost human, but not quite, and that not quite feeling triggers discomfort or even fear. This is why robots or CGI characters that look too realistic can feel creepy to us. And guess what? The same thing happens with embalmed bodies. When we look at a dead person in a casket, our brain wants to recognize them as the person we knew, but something is just slightly wrong. Their stillness, their waxy texture, the way their lips don't move when we talk to them, it's like looking at a mannequin that's trying too hard to be real. This is why many people feel uneasy at open casket funerals. It's not the idea of death itself. It's the fact that the person doesn't look like they should. Our brains are wired to detect life, and when we don't see it, it sets off alarm bells deep inside us. The beauty of imperfection. So why do dead people look fake? Because the little details that make someone real, the tiny twitches, the warmth, the imperfect skin tones, the life in their eyes, are gone forever. A corpse is a still version of something that was never meant to be still. If anything, this unsettling reality is a reminder that what makes us us isn't just our physical appearance. It's the life we bring to it. And once that's gone, all that's left is an uncanny, too perfect version of the person we used to know. So, the next time you attend a funeral and feel that eerie sensation creeping in, just remember, you're not imagining it. Your brain is simply recognizing what it was never meant to see. Someone who once moved, laughed, and spoke, now frozen forever. Chapter 4. What's the weirdest burial custom? The many ways humans deal with death. Throughout history, every culture has developed its own unique way of handling the dead. Some are solemn and quiet, others grand and celebratory, and a few are downright bizarre. But whether it's sky burials in Tibet, Viking ship burials, or the eerie practice of exhuming corpses in Madagascar, every tradition tells a story about how humans view death. So, what's the weirdest burial custom of all? That depends on what you consider weird. Some are gruesome, others poetic, and a few might make you wonder, wait, people actually do that? Let's take a tour of the strangest ways people have laid their loved ones to rest. 1. The hanging coffins of the Philippines and China. High up on the sides of cliffs in Sagada, Philippines, and parts of China, ancient wooden coffins hang eerily, some hundreds of feet above the ground. Why? The indigenous Igorot people believed that placing their dead closer to the sky brought them closer to the spirits of their ancestors. Hanging coffins were also a practical choice. Keeping bodies off the ground protected them from wild animals, grave robbers, and flooding. But imagine hiking through the mountains and suddenly, spotting a human-shaped box dangling above you. Creepy? Maybe. Ingenious? Absolutely. 2. The Tower of Silence, or a feast for vultures, Zoroastrian sky burial. For followers of Zoroastrianism, an ancient Persian religion, burying or cremating the dead was seen as impure because it could pollute the earth and fire. So, they came up with an extreme solution, letting vultures eat the dead. In places like India and Iran, Zoroastrians placed their deceased on towers of silence, circular stone platforms where vultures picked the bodies clean. This way, the soul could be freed while the remains were swiftly returned to nature. Gruesome? Maybe. But considering how quickly vultures can devour a body, sometimes in just a few hours, it was also one of the most efficient burial methods in history. 3. The Living Dead Festival, Madagascar's Famadihana. Imagine this. Your family digs up your deceased grandparents, redresses them in fresh clothes, dances with them around the village, and then wraps them back up in new silk shrouds before reburying them. Sounds like a horror movie, right? Well, in Madagascar, Famadihana, or the turning of the bones ritual, is a joyous occasion. Families exhume their loved ones every few years to celebrate them, share stories, and make sure they stay included in family life. For the Malagasy people, the dead are not truly gone until they fully decompose. So as long as there are bones left, the spirits still play a role in the lives of the living. Sure, it might be unsettling to dance with your great-grandmother's remains, but in Madagascar, it's an honor. 4. Viking funeral fire, ships, and warriors. Forget the neat rows of tombstones. If you were a Viking warrior, you got a legendary send-off. The most famous Viking burial involved placing the dead inside a wooden longship, surrounding them with weapons, treasures, and sometimes even sacrificed animals or servants. Then, the ship was either set on fire and sent out to sea or buried under a massive mound of earth. Why? Vikings believed in an afterlife called Valhalla, where warriors who died in battle would feast and fight forever. A grand burial made sure they arrived in style. While not many people today burn boats with their dead, Viking-style funerals have inspired movies, TV shows, and even modern cremation ceremonies. 5. The beads of the dead, South Korea's burial beads. South Korea has a big problem with space, not just for the living but for the dead. Traditional burials take up too much room, so in 2000, a law was passed requiring families to remove graves after 60 years. This led to a creative and strangely beautiful alternative, turning ashes into beads. Instead of keeping cremated remains in an urn, families can have them compressed into colorful, smooth beads that look like marbles. These beads are kept in homes as decorations or placed in glass containers. It's a unique way to honor the dead while avoiding the land shortage crisis. Plus, it's a lot less messy than scattering ashes into the wind. 6. The dead don't leave, Tibet's self-mummification monks. Most mummies are created after death. But what if you could mummify yourself while still alive? Some Buddhist monks in Tibet and Japan believed in achieving spiritual enlightenment through extreme discipline. Part of that discipline involved a terrifying, slow process of self-mummification that could take years. First, the monks followed a strict starvation diet, eating only nuts, seeds, and bark. Then, they drank a poisonous tree sap that killed bacteria and parasites, so their bodies wouldn't rot after death. Once they were near death, they meditated inside a stone tomb, sealed away in a tiny space with only a breathing hole. After several years, their tomb was opened, and if the body was preserved, the monk was declared a sacred mummy. Today, some of these self-mummified monks are displayed in temples, sitting in meditation as if they never left. 7. The underground cemetery of Capuchin monks, Palermo, Italy. What's creepier than visiting a graveyard? Walking through a basement full of standing, dressed-up corpses staring at you. In Palermo, Italy, the Capuchin Catacombs hold over 8,000 bodies, many of which are hanging on walls, fully clothed, and eerily preserved. Some look like they're asleep, while others still have hair, mustaches, and even lifelike expressions. The most famous body there is Rosalia Lombardo, a 2-year-old girl who died in 1920. Thanks to an unknown embalming technique, she looks almost alive, with glassy eyes and perfect skin. People call her the sleeping beauty of the catacombs. So, what's the weirdest of them all? With all these strange burial traditions, it's hard to pick the weirdest one. But what they all have in common is a deep respect for the dead. Even if that respect involves feeding them to vultures, keeping their bones in the family, or turning them into home decor. One thing is clear: death isn't the end of the story. It's just the beginning of a really strange chapter. Death might seem scary, but it's really just another part of life, full of weird, wonderful, and sometimes hilarious traditions. And hey, if you're ever worried about your cat eating your eyeballs, just make sure someone checks in on you.